My brain is wired in a way that I can hear a song, and that could be a hymn in church or a song on the radio, enough times that I can sing along and still have never actually listened to the words or understand anything of what it's about. And so sometimes I'll hear a song and actually listen to the words and go, oh. The ones that really catch me every once in a while, this doesn't happen a lot. There's a song where the tune doesn't match the words. Like usually a happy song has a happy tune and a sad song has a sad tune. And every once in a while you get a happy tune that's got sad words, and I don't know that. I'm just like, this is really catchy, this is great. And then I listen to it actually deeply and go, oh no, that's not what I thought that was about at all. So just to give you an example, Peter's going to play a couple of tunes for us. The first one. Happy or sad? Sad. That's Go to Dark Gethsemane. We sing it often during Lent. Is Go to Dark Gethsemane. Second one. Happy or sad? Happy. It's for the beauty of the earth, right? For the beauty of the earth, for the beauty of the skies. Now, it just so happens that these two particular songs are written to a meter or whatever the fancy musical word is that's the same. So you can sing them to each other's tunes. So you could say, go to dark Gethsemane, all who feel the tempter's power, your Redeemer's conflict see, watch with him one bitter hour. Is that the same thing? Not if you're not listening, it's not, right? Because if you're just hearing it and singing along, you're like, wow, this is a great Easter song. And then you turn around and go, oh, no, that's actually about death, dying, and the cross, right? And I share all of this to say my own brain, sometimes I don't fully hear what it is that I'm listening to and fully comprehend what is being communicated. And when you think about human communication, that's true of all of us, right? Often we try to communicate something and people don't understand what we're saying, even if we think we're being clear. Other times, we don't understand what other people are saying. And that's if we're all on our best days with the best intentions. But then there's times where people are intentionally not speaking what they mean, or are intentionally being manipulative, or just using figures of speech. Like, I didn't grow up in the South, so I thought, bless his heart. I thought that was good. And then I learned, no, when somebody says that, they don't mean, it sounds nice, but it's not, right? And so there's all kinds of complexity in our human communication. And this isn't new. I'm reading a novel right now that was written in the 1850s. It's called North and South, and the main character is a young lady named Margaret, whose dad was like a country pastor. And then he quit that and moved them to a manufacturing town, and she's gotten to know this working family. The dad works in one of the textile mills. The daughter is sick, and she has a deep heart for the struggle that they have to pay their bills. In the meantime, they're about to go on strike. And then her dad is the tutor for one of the factory owners. And so she's spending time with both of them and doesn't understand either one of them. They don't understand what she's saying. And they certainly, the master of the factory and the workers, don't understand each other as this whole strike thing is getting ready to go off. And as you read it, it's just a whole study in human misunderstanding and communication. And this was in 1850, right? We did not invent this stuff. However, because of the technology that we have, we can spread miscommunication and misunderstanding much farther, much faster. And so we live in a time where it is hard to know what to believe. We can't even agree what the word truth means, let alone what we might call facts. Not that that's ever been agreed upon by everybody. And then when it comes to then listening, like how do we know what to listen to and pay attention to? But then speaking, we can also feel hesitant because everything is so sort of loaded all the time with tension that saying what we think or what we believe in the wrong crowd can make us feel really uncomfortable, right? So how do we navigate all that, this messiness of human communication? Well, it turns out Paul, back in his day, they also had miscommunication. If they didn't, we would have no letters in the New Testament. If you read the letters of the New Testament, they're almost 100% the ones Paul wrote saying, hey, that's not what I said. Like, I told you this is the gospel, not this other thing. You're doing communion wrong. You're doing this wrong, right? Because of that. So today we hear just a little bit of 2 Corinthians, and Paul starts off and says, even if our gospel is veiled. And by that, he's meaning if we have told the world that God loves you just as you are, that Jesus has died and been raised to give you new life, and that death is not the end, the worst things that happen to you are at the end, all of that. Even if we have said that, not everybody hears that, right? Because the gospel is veiled. And he says, for those who are unbelievers. So he's got this idea, right, that there's believers and unbelievers, and the believers have fully understood that God has given us new life to live, and we should choose to live differently and love and care for our neighbor and pray for our enemies and all that stuff that Jesus says. And he's saying, but the unbelievers can't hear it. And I think this is an important point, because when we think about human communication, how often when we're in a spot where it feels tense and we're feeling misunderstood, do we blame that on the other people's listening? Maybe sometimes, right? We might go, you know what, maybe I'm not being clear. Mostly, though, I think we kind of hole up in our own way and try to think what we're going to say next rather than listen deeply to the people that we're trying to communicate with and dwell within those spaces, right? So when Paul says, you know, the unbelievers, the ones that have a veiled understanding of the gospel, what I actually hear as a Lutheran is that we are simultaneously saint and sinner at the same time, right? Which means, yes, we are believers, and yes, sometimes the gospel is clear, but on our worst days is the gospel clear? Probably not, right? And so there are times where we have doubt. There are times where our understanding of what God is calling us to may not be clear. There are times where we act out of our fears and frustrations and not out of our faith. And so when Paul is saying, right, the gospel is veiled for all those people, I think our best stance is to go, yeah, that's probably us, right? Not all the time, but some of the time, and maybe we should have some humility about how we understand our sense of the gospel and how we carry that out in the world. And Paul, in the midst of this, says, he uses God twice in this, once with the little g and once with the big G, right? So when Paul is talking about the gospel being veiled, he says the little g, God of this world, is responsible for that veiled sense. And what I hear there is that the things that are on our hearts and minds all the time that maybe have not our faith things, but the worries and cares around us. So, for example, when I'm riding in the car hearing a song that I've sung 100 times, but I don't actually know what the words are about, I'm singing along, but I'm not paying attention to that. I'm paying attention to the road, right? Or I'm paying attention to the road, but also thinking, maybe I shouldn't have handled that situation just that way that I was just in, right? Like all those things. And when you layer into it, like the novel I'm reading, you got people that are just struggling to eat and take care of their families. You got people that are trying to figure out how to run their business. And you got people that in all of that are trying to figure out if anybody loves them or not, and if there's anybody that can be a friend in the world to them. So when you take all of that and layer that onto our human journey, right, the little g God of this world sucks up a ton of our attention and energy, and the gospel maybe doesn't always have a wedge to get in there to help us to live and with joy and hope and faith and peace and love and all the things that are the gift of life we have in Jesus. So then we say, all right, well, how do we do that then? And I think what Paul is saying is that the gospel ought to be the filter coming in and going out, right? Like we should always have the gospel with us to proclaim Jesus risen and crucified, to proclaim the God of light that shines into the darkness, and to listen in that same way. Now, we have examples of this, of people that have done this. Today, in this second week of this journey of Harmonies Through Heritage we're taking with our Senate's Just Love team, our focus is African American spirituals. So as African people were enslaved and brought over, last week we talked about drums and call and response singing, and that morphs into spirituals. They didn't start off as Christian people, but their slave masters were, and so they started to get exposed to this story of Jesus and to this gospel story. Now, if you were a slave, could you go up to your overseer and say, I'm having a bad day, and I'm not feeling like you're really respecting me today, and express that kind of opinion? No, right? You're not allowed to have opinions, thoughts, ideas. You're not to express any of that. And so how do you do that? Well, one answer is you don't, right? You kind of hold it all in. But that's not what slaves did. They sang. And so they sang spirituals, and sometimes those spirituals were work songs that carried them through the horrors of the work that they had to do every day. But they also were the songs that allowed them to sing out their deepest pain and sorrows and struggles and emotions, but they could do it without it being something that drew attention to it being their sorrows, struggles, and emotions that they weren't allowed to express. Because what they did was sing about Jesus. And then, right, those that were enslaving them would go, oh, hey, they're singing about Jesus. Awesome. They're not trying to do any communicating that we don't understand, like they thought, right? Their understanding of the gospel was really veiled, right? And so when we hear those spirituals, which Peter's going to play one real quick. We're going to do this exercise again. Happy or sad? It's kind of sad, right? And it's if you know it, it goes, I want Jesus to walk with me. Second one. How's that one sound? A little happier? So that one goes, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus, right? So that one's a little bit brighter than I want Jesus to walk with me. But the thing that we have to recognize as people who weren't back then, right? These all were songs coming out of people who woke up every day enslaved. So I can sing in the morning when I rise and go, oh, I really like that song. That makes me feel like each day I get up and Jesus is with me from my warm and comfortable house with like all the blessings that I have, right? So when we hear these spirituals, it's helpful to think at a deeper level, like the pain that gave voice to them. And what I hear with these two particular ones is, I want Jesus to walk with me as a dark day where you just need Jesus to show up. And so is the other one. The difference is the joy that God gives us, joy and suffering are not mutually exclusive. Happiness and suffering may be, but joy and suffering are not. Because joy is like this intangible thing that comes with this gift of life that we have in Jesus, and it can land in the worst places of suffering that we can be. And so you can have a song that sounds a little upbeat and happy that is coming from a deep place of pain and sorrow. And so all of those people sang. They sang the gospel. They processed what they heard, right? They heard about Jesus from people who were telling them a terrible version of Jesus, and then they said, that doesn't sound like the guy you're telling us about, right? So they had gospel lenses coming in and gospel lenses going out, and that carried them through the work, and it carried them through the suffering, and it carried them through the struggle. What I think Paul is telling us today is that we should have those gospel lenses both like coming in and going out. Because part of what he says is we don't proclaim ourselves. Now, we all got ideas. We all have opinions. We all have emotions that we want to share. And when you think about the fraught communication landscape that we live in, everybody has their, like people will say, well, I have my truth and you have your truth, and then we all just, right, get into that big old mess. And Paul would say, no, we don't proclaim our opinions and ideas and thoughts and things. We proclaim the gospel. That doesn't mean people will always understand it, but that is what we say, and it's how we listen. Now, this brings me to what does it mean to proclaim the gospel, right? And it is telling people that Jesus loves them, more so showing them. But also, Luther had this idea of a theologian of a cross versus a theologian of glory. And a theologian of glory, he would say, is anybody that sees God in the things of success and blessing. And so when you think about an empire that says, God is with us as we go conquer you, that's a theologian of glory. If you think about, oh, how successful I am, and I'm going to share that and tell everybody how wonderful I am, that's a theologian of glory. A theologian of the cross sees God in suffering. So when Paul says we proclaim Jesus and we proclaim God of light into the darkness, part of what Paul is talking about is suffering, about sitting in suffering, about sitting in suffering with people, and about that being part of our lens. And I think where that ultimately leads us, as we hear Paul saying we should proclaim Jesus, not ourselves, is that we are called to just simply be fully present. To be fully present in people's suffering, to be fully present in their joy, to be fully present in our listening when people are speaking to us, and be fully present in how we speak, so we're not just talking out, right, whatever just comes to mind, but really living out of our faith and our hope and our love to share that with the world. That is not an easy thing to do, right? And so Paul, when he says the gospel is veiled, sometimes it's veiled for us too. But the blessing we have is that the Jesus who came into this world was fully present with and for us, and promises to continue to be fully present with and for us as we go out into the world to sing this melody of grace that God has first sung to us, trusting that if we can have gospel lenses coming and going, we will bring good love and grace into the world. And when we don't, Jesus is still fully present to keep us moving in the right direction anyway. Amen.